Hi, my name is Robert Brook, co-founder of Alignment Lab in Sausalito, California, where we offer highly skilled movement and bodywork therapy, as well as yoga-based movement classes. I've been teaching yoga for over 25 years, and I've studied with some highly skilled yoga instructors. But about 10 years ago, I realized that I needed to look outside of the yoga community if I were going to continue to grow as a yoga student and as a yoga teacher. I began studying biomechanical alignment and eventually dynamic neuromuscular stabilization, or DNS. Incorporating this knowledge into traditional yoga has been a game changer, helping me to develop an approach to teaching yoga that is at once safer and more effective. Beginners, you can use these classes to learn yoga with greater efficacy and much less chance of injury. Experienced students, you will discover how to resolve long-standing habits that have been slowing your progress. Thank you for coming and enjoy the class. You can start lying on your back. With your knees bent. And lift the legs up. And just a quick review, so the angle of the legs is such that the knees are rolled a little bit out here. Feet a little bit in, so your knees are wider than your hips. And the feet a little narrower. And if it helps to have a little height under the head, you can take that. And then breathe into your lower abdomen and into your lower back. And just feel the lower trunk activate. And if you want to just remind yourself about a couple things here. One, if you're squeezing a little with your hands, so I've got my hands wrapped around my waist here with my fingers in the front and my thumbs in the back. And I'm applying a little bit of pressure, and the abdominal muscles are pushing back. So I don't feel any collapse against that pressure, regardless of whether I'm inhaling or I'm exhaling. And you can bring the arms up. And then we'll just do a slight turn. Your whole body is going to rotate about 5 degrees to the right. So you're just turning everything over until you feel the weight shift onto the right side of the pelvis, back of the pelvis, and onto the right shoulder blade. Your head should turn the same amount as the rest of the body. And then back to center. And then about 5 degrees to the left. So you're going to feel the weight shift to the left side of the pelvis, left side of the back, left shoulder blade. Head turns slightly. And back to center. So I just want you to do that one more time to the right. And make sure everything's turning together, everything's moving as a unit. And back to center. And to the left. basic but important. When your abdominal muscles activate, you want to feel the deeper abdominal muscles be the dominant, the muscles that are dominant in that activation, and not the rectus in the center. So if you touch your lower abdomen and you feel, you bring your fingertips out to just to the edge of the groin line, you should feel that the shape of the abdomen should have a ball, kind of a ball shape to it, where you get this even inflation from the left groin all the way to the right groin, and from the pubic bone all the way up to just above your navel. And you shouldn't feel an indent where in the space between the groin and where the rectus abdominis sits, which is a little ways in. So when you want to get that activated, and then when you lift your legs up, you should still have that ball shape. You shouldn't feel an indent near the groin. You should feel like it inflates evenly all the way across. And once you have that, then I'd like you to repeat that motion. So you're just turning a little to the right, not too far, really just a few degrees. And the abdominal activation should remain consistent. And back to center and to the left. And you'll notice that just that slight movement back to center and to the right. So just that slight movement really gets the abdominal muscles working even more. Especially if you're not going to let that outer transversus abdominis muscle, you're not going to let that collapse. So if that collapses, come back to center, then the rectus abdominis takes over, and the mechanics will be inherently flawed with using the rectus to try to do this work. And back to center. Then look to your right, bring the right arm down. So your elbow is down, it's bent, your forearm is rotated, you're pronating, so the palm is facing away from you here. And then you're coming over onto that shoulder and that hip. The knees are still a little bit wider than the hips, which means your left knee, well, the right knee will be at the same height of the hip because it's on the floor. But the left knee should be a little higher than the left hip here. And I want you to see if you can make the shoulder heavy enough that the outer right ribs just under the armpit lift off of the floor. And then you're going to keep that shoulder heavy and turn your pelvis and your trunk around toward the floor. And as you do that, turn your head around to look to the right, over your right shoulder. And then turn back and a little bit past that, and as you're turning, make sure that your right knee doesn't come off the floor. And try not to let your ribs fall onto the floor here. Try to keep the weight on the shoulder and not on the ribs. And then again, turning toward the floor, so you're rotating around the right hip and right shoulder. And then away from the floor. And toward the floor. And then you can go back to supine from there. Then look to your left. Bring the left arm down into that same position. And then come over onto that left side. So again, your right knee should be a little higher than your right hip. The foot's a little bit lower. So that's to help orient the femur and the hip socket properly in an optimal way, let's put it that way. Then see if you can make the shoulder heavy enough that the outer upper ribs on the left side are a little bit off the floor. The crown of the head's reaching away from your tailbone. And then turning toward the floor. So you're turning your pelvis, your trunk, and then turn your head around, look to the left. And then turn back. Meanwhile, keep your left foot heavy. Your left foot should be on the floor, planted on the floor, and you're keeping your knee on the floor as you turn, trying to keep your ribs off the floor. And then turn toward the floor. So we're moving from adduction of the hip and the shoulder toward abduction of the hip and the shoulder. Turn toward the floor. And away. And once more toward. And then back to supine. And then you want to check that your abdominal muscles are, again, activating properly here. So this next motion can be a little tricky if you haven't done it before. So I'll try to talk you through it as clearly as I can. So you'll take your left leg, keeping the same bend of the knee. So you're not moving from your foot, you're moving, or your knee, you're moving from your hip. So you can take the left leg and you're going to move it just a little ways away from your chest. So your left leg is going just a little closer to the floor. It doesn't have to be very much. And then you're going to move your right arm about that same distance. So your left arm and your left leg and your right arm have lowered a bit. And then you're going to raise those two limbs and lower the opposite. So as you lift your left leg and right arm, you're going to lower your right leg and your left arm. And then reverse that again. And then just do a few repetitions of that. It helps to think about the opposite hand following the opposite knee. So my left hand follows my left knee, my right hand follows my right knee. Or my left hand follows my right knee. Hopefully that's what I said. Doesn't have to be a big motion. You can keep the movement relatively compact. And then back to center. And look to your right again. Bring the right arm down. And this time, come over into side sitting. So you want to take your right knee and move it take your right leg, I should say, and move it in such a way that your right leg comes out from underneath your left leg. So initially here in the setup, your thighs are somewhat parallel. You've got your left leg resting on the right lower leg, right ankle. But I'm going to have you slide that right knee out, for that right leg out from underneath the left. So you're going to be much more flexed in the right hip here. Then you can support with your right hand and push to lift your pelvis up off the floor, and then come up off your hand. So you're up on your knees this way. And then you can bring the hand back down and use the arm to assist you to lower the hips. So that's the way into this kneeling position that will allow you to minimize the stress on your knees if your knees bother you when you do this. And if you want to try decreasing reliance on the arm, then you would try to go down more just using your hips, and then coming up just using the hips. But that can torque the knee, so you have to be sure that that's not happening. Otherwise, just keep using the hand to get up, and then the arm to help lower you back down again. So either way is fine. Alright, then bring your right arm forward, so you're on your forearm, and then go back to supine from there. And then we'll do that going to the left. So look to the left, so the motion begins with your eyes. Bring the left arm down, and then come over up onto the hip into the side sitting position. Then you're going to slide your left leg out from underneath the right until your right knee can rest on the floor. So you got both knees, both feet on the floor here. Then push with your left hand and lift the pelvis, and then come up off the hand. Then you can use the arm again to lower the pelvis down. So again, the arm assists the hips here, so that if the strength of the hip, or if there's any issue with the knee, you can avoid straining your knee. But it can also be done with just the hips, in which case I find it helps a lot to reach the arms more forward, to act as a counterweight, to make it easier to do the transition. But again, if that bothers the knee, definitely don't do it that way. Use the arm. And if you find that you don't need the arm the whole way down, you can use it part of the way. So use your best judgment here. Good. And then bring the left hand forward, forearm down, go back to supine. Just recheck that abdominal activation. All right, so to the right again, look, bring the arm down. Now this time as you come over, I want you to bring that right knee up more towards your right elbow. So you're going to come right up over and into that kneeling position. So that's the transition you're going. You bring the knee higher so that as you come over, you have that hip to support you to get up more easily. And you can go back to supine and try going to the left. So the difference between what we're doing here and what we've been doing more historically is, instead of keeping the knee at the same height relative to the left arm, you're deliberately bringing the knee higher. So as you come over, your leg is in a better position to be able to lift you up. So you're trying to go, instead of stopping in the side sitting position, you're trying to go directly up into that kneeling position. Alright, so one more variation, back to supine. And we'll do the same thing going to the right. So look, bring the arm down. You're going to come right up into kneeling and then step your left foot into the lunge. So we can work on this a moment. Again, observe the setup. So this knee, the right knee is a little out relative to my hips. It's not vertically right under my hip, it's a little bit lateral. Likewise, my left knee is a little lateral to the line of my left hip. And the feet are slightly in from there. So that's an important setup. And then from there, keeping a neutral spine. So this motion is all hip and knee. I'm sitting back toward my right heel. Now if I find that I don't go very far and already I'm feeling a lot of load in my knee, then just don't go very far back, just go back a little. If you can go further back, that's fine. Just don't go back further by collapsing in your low back and just kind of flopping onto your heel, even if you have the flexibility to do that. Try to control the motion back, and then when you come forward, keep the pelvis at about the same height, and you'll bring your hands down inside your foot. So that's called tripod. And you should feel most of the load in your left hip. And then come upright. So you want to upright the pelvis fully around the right hip. And then again, neutral spine. So don't round your low back. Control that motion back toward the right heel. And then try to keep the pelvis at the same height as you come forward, and bring the hands down inside the left foot. Right, and then from there back up. So if you can, you step that left foot back, bring the knee down, so you're back to this kneeling position. And then if you were using the arm for support, I would do that. Bring that arm down, bring that knee forward, and then go back to supine from there. Now we'll do the same sequence going to the left. So look to the left, bring the arm down, and again, you're going to bring your left knee a little higher, sort of towards your left elbow, as you come over, so you can come right up into the kneeling position, and then step the right foot into the lunge, the kneeling lunge. So knees a little wider, feet a little narrower, and then neutral spine, sitting back. Protect your knee, that's number one priority. And then try to keep the pelvis at the same height as you come forward. You can use your fingertips here, you can bring your palms down. Just make sure that you're not bringing your palms down by rounding your upper back and collapsing your head down. So you want to be thinking of uprighting your head even as you go lower, so that what allows you to bring more of your hands down is the motion in the right hip and not a bend from your spine. Then come upright again. Sit back with control, and then shift forward into the tripod. And uprighting, and sit back, and shift forward. From here, I want you to just step out of it with your right foot, so you're in quadruped. Then walk your hands a little forward into a kneeling plank. Let the pelvis fully upright and lift the spine, the upper part of the spine and the head higher, drawing the shoulder blades a little further down the back. Be careful that you don't have your tailbone lifted up here. Make sure to let the tailbone relax down, but also don't let the pelvis sag, and your lumbar spine, don't let it sag in the middle. So make sure that the lumbar spine stays supported and feels like it's suspended in the middle. And again, that's those lower abdominals. So same abdominal activation you were using earlier. And you want to maintain that activation as you go back. So even though in the transition you're not as loaded, you don't want to let that abdominal activation go, because if you do, then one of two things will happen. Either you'll hyperextend the back, which you don't want, or you'll flex the lumbar spine and collapse into that, which you also don't want. So keeping the lower abdominals working properly, stabilizing from there, you can maintain the shape of the spine as you go back, so that all of that motion is coming from your hips and your shoulders and not from your spine. And then go forward, back to kneeling plank. And back again. So this transition, mastering this transition, is extremely important. And forward again. And mistake that I see a lot is in back. Another common mistake that I see a lot is that as students are in they call this the prone squat. So when students are in the prone squat, they tend to work their hip flexors. So the hip flexor pulls the femur and the front of the pelvis together. And then as they come forward, the hip flexors stay kind of stuck on, and then that causes the pelvis to tip too far forward and the tailbone to lift up. So you have to make sure you relax the front of the hip so the tailbone can relax down. Otherwise, not only will it not be so good for your low back, but you'll also have a hard time working the abdominal muscles properly. And then you can go part way back, come up into bear, and then stretch the legs into downward facing dog. So that tendency to work the hip flexors, to put it in a more pedestrian way, a more sort of plain language way, to tighten the groin, is going to be there in downward dog as well. So even though you don't want the pelvis to just kind of tuck and collapse, which would happen if you were to just only relax the groin, you also, in your effort to try and untuck the pelvis and to get the sit bones to lift up, you're trying to do that without using or without overusing the hip flexors. And again, the key is that lower abdominal activation, that maintaining that ball shape in the lower abdomen. So a cue I like in downward dog is to not try to lift your tailbone up. Lifting the tailbone up will tighten the hip flexors, and the groin will feel crampy and uncomfortable. So relax the tailbone down, and then try to move your pubic bone away from your navel to open up and activate the lower abdomen, and then lift the sit bones gradually higher by stretching the legs more. And then bend the knees and come down a moment. You can bring your forearms down. Take some load off the wrists. Now push your forearms down and try and stretch the crown of the head further forward and pull the shoulder blades away from the neck. So you're uprighting the head here. Keep the spine neutral. So the tendency is when you're in this position, this forearm position, and your elbows are on the floor, it challenges your shoulders, the range of motion in your shoulders a bit more. And so the tendency is to collapse into that, where your head drops toward the floor. You're trying to keep your head and your chest away from the floor and extend the head forwards. Then you can come back up lift the knees, and then walk in and do a squat for a moment. And then just come up gradually out of the squat. You want to feel the weight in your heels here. Front of the heel, ankle. Good. So you can stand center of the mat. Stretch the arms forward. Bend the knees. Make sure the knees move apart and not in here. And then step or hop the feet apart. Good 3.5, 4 feet. So you're in what I call the wide high squat. And remember the key to the wide high squat, like any squat, is that your hips are moving back and your knees don't get pushed forward this way. So it's not this, it's this. But when you move your hips back that way, the pelvis tends to rotate forward. So once you have the hips back, then you need to rotate the pelvis back a little bit to upright it to the rib cage so you can activate the trunk stabilizers properly. So it can be tricky to locate that, but you have to keep reminding yourself to do it. Otherwise, it's easy to fall back in the habit of just bringing the knees and hips forward here. Then go to your right, align your feet to the right. So we'll do Trikonasana. Stretch the arms, stretch the legs. Inhale. As you exhale, bend to the right. And reach down and reach up at the same time as you reach down through the left heel and out and up with the crown of your head. And you want to feel that same abdominal activation that you were working on earlier in your Trikonasana. And when the abdominal muscles are working properly, you should be able to release the right buttock. And the feeling will be that buttock is just kind of dropping toward the back foot. And that's going to open up the low back in a pretty nice way. In the way you want. And you can come up from there, reverse that. To the left. So reaching the arms apart, opening the chest laterally, and out of the back leg, extending the spine vertically as you turn the chest and the head around. And then find out what's going on in the lower abdomen and how that's affecting the lower back. You should be able to feel that as that activates, the abdominal area activates, the low back releases, the buttock releases. You feel more support, space, both space in and support for your lumbar spine. Step or pop the feet in and come out. Let's throw in a calf stretch here. So if you have one of these half domes, you can use that. And if you don't, you can use If you have like a thin block, like a 3-inch block, that works. Or a rolled up sticky mat can also work to put under your foot. So that's also fine. You're going to put your left forefoot on it. And how much height you have will influence how far forward or back you have the other foot. So this mat is pretty thin, so that makes it pretty easy for me. But the half dome is a little bigger, and with the half dome, I'm not going to bring my right foot as far forward to get the same amount of effect on my left ankle. Consciously rotate your thigh bones out. They're going to tend to rotate in, and you're rotating them out to minimize, or if possible, eliminate the tendency for the thigh bones to roll in. When you do that, the feet and ankles also tend to roll out. And you don't want to be standing there on the outside edges of your foot. That's not a good idea. So you're trying to keep the big toe down on the floor as you rotate the thigh bones outward. If your feet are tight, that can be difficult. This is a safe position if you were to be on the outside edges of your foot. Assuming you don't have a problem with your ankle, that's not going to be potentially injurious for you. But if you were just standing on one leg, let's say you're doing vrikshasana and you're turning your thigh bone out, it wouldn't work to be trying to balance on the outside edge of your foot. So you would need that big toe on the floor. Or if you were doing a squat, if I squat down, I'm also rotating my thigh bones out, but I don't want to be letting the foot and ankle collapse out with it. So make sure that you're trying to keep your big toe down. Go ahead and switch legs. Either, or in the case of the right foot here, where the right foot's on the half dome, you can practice kind of reaching that big toe for the half dome. On the left foot, you're reaching the big toe for the floor as you rotate. And what that does is it allows the head of the femur to sit in a position in the socket, which makes it easier for the pelvis to rotate freely around the hip joint, which makes it easier for you to upright the pelvis, which means, in this case, for the pelvis to tip a little further back, which is then going to allow you to use your diaphragm and your abdominal muscles to to kind of push the intra-abdominal pressure into the lumbar spine and down more into the pelvic floor. So that uprighting of the pelvis is, in any posture, but particularly when you're standing, can be extremely elusive, and you need to kind of develop it over time. If you're always internally rotated in your hip, you make it near impossible for yourself to do that. So that external rotation is an essential part of getting the pelvis to upright and being able to activate the abdominal muscles properly and to take tension out of the low back. And beyond that, to support the lower back. So the lower back is getting supported from the front as well as from the spinal muscles in the lower back. So you can release that. So I want you to grab your block. can also use a half dome for this, either one is fine. And separate your feet again, so go back to that wide high squat. Maybe not quite as wide as you would for Trikonasana. So if Trikonasana were 4 feet apart, you'd be at 3.5 feet, or something relatively, an adjustment relative to that. And then we'll go into this lunge. So we did the kneeling lunge earlier, but this is a standing lunge. The only difference between this and the kneeling one is that your knee's not on the floor, but you're still dropping the knee a little bit so you can get the pelvis to upright more easily, so you can activate the trunk stabilizers. You also want to be able to turn the pelvis around more towards your right leg. And hold the block with your left hand. And without moving your pelvis from its position, stretch the left heel back and down. And then straighten the right knee and rotate and bend around the right hip and reach for the floor with your block. That can be inside the foot, that can be outside the foot. It all depends on how much you're able to rotate around the hip. But once you have the hand support, then you want to use that to upright the head. So again, I'm reaching the crown of the head away from my back leg and then turning. And then I can bring the right arm around into the line of the shoulder girdle. An extremely important element of this posture is, again, that lower abdominal activation. There's a tendency to kind of suck that in, and that will work against you. If you feel that you're over tightening the lower abdomen, let it go first, and then activate it by creating that ball shape, and that will help to free the hips to rotate the pelvis further around. So the more stability you have in the lower trunk, the more the hips will increase their range. Right, so you can look down, you can bend the front leg, and then just rotate out of it. So you're back to your wide high squat. And then turning to the left. So we've got this lunge, pelvis uprighting, then holding with the right hand, stretching the right heel. And this cue is very important. Can you stretch the heel, the back leg, without it pulling the pelvis with it? Can you just stretch the leg without the pelvis following the leg? The right hip is rotating, continues to rotate toward the left leg. Then straighten the left knee and rotate and bend around the left hip and bring your hand down via the block or the half dome. And then use the arm support to upright and turn the head around. And then bring the left hand into your line of vision, which will generally bring it right into the line of the shoulder girdle. So you don't want that arm way back behind you. You want it to be reaching away from your support arm. The arm will get more vertical as the chest turns more, as the shoulder girdle turns more. You don't have to try to take it to the vertical position and then find some way to catch up with it. Again, release the lower abdomen, then activate it, creating that ball shape, and then try to turn your hips around more, your pelvis around more, and your chest around more. down, bend the left knee, and then come back up into your wide high squat. And step in and come out. Good. Set the block down in front of you, just a few inches in front of your feet. Then, with your arms at your sides, hinge forward from your hips. And find your end range there in terms of your hamstring length and your hip mobility. Find your end range. Where can you go without rounding your back, in other words? And then the block should be within reach at that end range. And what I mean by that is the height, if you know you have the right height, the height is appropriate for that end range. So, in other words, if I get to here, and I can't reach the block, then I need to make the block higher, at least initially. And then I can use the block to upright my head, and also as something to push into, like I'm trying to squish the block down to activate the lower abs, and that helps me to free the hips to tip the pelvis more forward. And as the pelvis tips more forward, then I can lower the block. So there's nothing wrong with going lower in the posture, but how I get there matters. Let eyes, ears, tongue soften. When you're ready to come up, first unweight the hands, and then with the legs very straight, very active, lift up the trunk. And take whatever time you need to let the breath settle, breath recover. Good. Let's do downward dog one more time. So you can squat down into that. In downward dog, there's a very, very strong tendency for the shoulder girdle to become narrow in the posture. And you want to learn how to make the shoulder girdle wider. So see if you can feel how to move the shoulders wider apart. And and the shoulder blades wider apart. And to make the upper chest wider. And see if you can feel how that supports the upper spine, the upper thoracic spine, and gives you more strength to stretch the arms and send the weight further back into your feet. Once again, watch that lower abdominal area and don't let it collapse. And you can bend the knees and come down. Good. Have a block and lie on your back. And we'll do Viparita Karani on the block. So adjust the height of the block under the pelvis. And as you're doing that, get the shoulders back and the chest open. And get your breath once again down into the lower abdomen. So you can be on any height of the block that works for you. Just don't go so high that you feel wobbly or lower back strain. And go ahead and bring the legs up. So Viparita Karani includes as one of its elements a back bending action in the chest. I'm deliberately trying to extend the upper part of my spine. And whenever I do a back bend in my chest, there's always going to be a tendency for my lumbar spine to try to help, which tends to push my ribs, my lower ribs forward and upward toward my head. So even as I'm doing my back bend in the chest, I want to find a way to release those ribs down so that my diaphragm can continue to create intra-abdominal pressure and stabilize the lower back. The shoulders should be kept heavy. With the eyes, ears, and tongue soft, throat soft. the legs very, very active. Good. Bend the knees, bring the feet down. And then take the block down a notch. And join the soles of the feet, let the knees separate. And bring the knees up, separate the feet. You want to feel a connection here between the front of the pelvis and the lower front ribs. You want to feel like that connection stays. And then stretch out the left leg part way or all the way. And watch that the leg doesn't drag the pelvis away from the rib cage. So keep your connection between pelvis and rib cage as you stretch out the leg. And bring the left leg in. And try that with the right. Here you're still keeping the shoulders down and the chest open, so you don't want to let the chest collapse. You're also keeping the leg and the hip somewhat active here, they're not just flopping. So just slightly rolling the right leg in here so it doesn't just flop and roll out to the side. Now you can try this with both legs at the same time, but you want to make sure that your heels are on a grippy surface like a sticky mat, so that you have something to push into, because the weight of both legs has even more of a tendency to drag the pelvis with it. So I'm pushing my heels into the mat so that I can keep my pelvis and my rib cage more connected here. If you try this and you start feeling strain in your low back or in anywhere in your hips, then you don't want to stay in that. You want to just come out, just bend your knees, and just lie with your knees bent here. For some reason, it's just a lot harder with two legs than it is with one, which is why I historically haven't taught it this way. Alright, so you can bring the feet in and take the block to the lowest height, if it's not already. And then bring your knees up. And just let the groin soften in here. Let the knees and legs just kind of fall in toward the chest a little here. Then with your hands, add a little bit of load. And as you feel your legs pulling towards your abdomen, push your abdomen into your legs in equal proportion. So how much you pull should be directly proportional to how much you can push back with the lower abdominal muscles. And then try to keep that abdominal activation as you let go of the legs and bring your feet down. Then you can take out the block and come down. Add some height under the head. Adjust the shoulder blades wider apart. And then stretch out your legs. And just check to see that you're lying symmetrically. Make sure the chin is down. The skull should roll toward the chest and not toward the floor above the head. And let your eyes close. And begin to go inside. Be aware of your posture and of your body in the posture. As an observer, to the body and to the body doing the posture. Meaning your perspective, your point of view shifts from the one doing the posture to an observer to the body doing the posture. And as such, you are aware of whatever sensations are manifesting as the posture manifests. So for instance, there's a sensation, a feeling that the facial muscles and the facial skin, those tissues are softening and falling to opposite sides of the face. And as that feeling manifests, you're aware of that feeling. You're just an observer to the sensation. There's a feeling that the inner corners of the eyes are becoming softer and deeper. And as that feeling manifests, you're aware of that feeling. There's a feeling of the tongue relaxing. There's a feeling of the throat softening, of the jaw relaxing. The inner ears softening and deepening. The creases of the groins softening and deepening. There's a feeling that the pelvic and abdominal organs are relaxing and settling into the back of the body. Now, whether that actually happens is not important. It's simply the feeling that matters, simply the sensation that matters, and your awareness of that sensation. There's a feeling that the energy of the body is settling. The breath settles. And you begin to feel that that energy is more calm, more stable, more grounded. And you're just aware of the feeling. Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Hari Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Hari Om. Notice your breath. Start to take slightly deeper breaths. eyes open. And when you're aware that you're breathing normally again, bend your knees, bring your knees into the chest for a moment. And from there, roll to your right side. And sit up from sideline.